started. Chairwoman Newsome is presenting another bill right now, another committee, so I'm going to be filling in until she comes back. Barb, would you please call the roll?
Representative Angelos,
Here.
Representative Burkhart,
Here.
Representative Byron,
Here.
Representative Larson,
Here.
Representative Singh,
Here.
Representative Storer, Vice Chairman Western,
Here.
Representative Winter, and Madam Chairwoman will be on her way.
Excuse for now.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think the first bill for our consideration is Senate File 87. And Bob, real quick, do you want to do the large project funding first or the cap? Okay. Okay. So we're going to do Senate File 87 first. Obviously, Bob, we know who you are, but just make sure to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Carly Provenza, Albany County, House District 45. I'm bringing with you today my doppelganger, as I like to call him, Bob Budd, who's a director. And then I also bring you Senate File 87. This bill is an inflationary change that what constitutes a large project for the WNRTF. We set this in 2005 for $200,000, and the inflationary change since then has been pretty dramatic. I believe Mr. Budd will, or Director Budd will have some information for you on that. This basically, we have, you'll see later, we have 9 large projects. 3 of those large projects of this year would fall under this, so that the legislature isn't spending more bureaucratic time approving projects that sometimes have upwards of a 34-to-1 match with donors. So I'll stand for questions, and I'm sure Director Budd would be happy to as well.
Committee, any questions for Representative Provenza? Seeing none, Mr. Budd.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Bob Budd, Director, Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust. In the handout materials, I went back and did a little analysis of inflation over time, starting in 2014, just did the last 10 years. You can see what's happened. It's about a 4-fold increase in our total costs when you compare it with the number of projects. That's the price of concrete, it's the price of steel, it's the price of fence posts, those kind of things. We looked at projects this summer up in Hot Springs County and went out and looked at river projects, fish passage, irrigation infrastructure, and those kind of things. And this was clearly an issue. So the select committee came back at the meeting the next day and said we need to raise that. They chose the number, said let's just double it. As an aside, when we talked with appropriations about this, one of them said, well, if we're only going to do it every 18 years or so, we probably ought to make it significant. But that's what it is. It just gives us more latitude for those projects that are going to come in at a level that 18 years ago was very different. So that's what it is. And I don't think there's anything more to say about it. It just changes the threshold for large projects.
Committee, any questions? Mr. Budd, I do have a question. I guess when this went before appropriations, did they have any concerns or any questions or any heartburn?
Mr. Chairman, they did not.
Okay. Seeing no questions, appreciate it. Let's go ahead and go to public testimony. Is there anybody who'd like to testify on this bill? Anybody in the audience? Barb, do we have anybody online? Let's go ahead and let them in.
Ms. Howe, if you'd like to testify in this bill, you'll just have to accept the invitation to become a panelist. All right, we've got you in the room, so you just want to unmute and turn on your camera if you're able.
Welcome to House TRW. Please go ahead and state your name and who you're with. We can't hear you. I don't know if you're on mute on your end. Indeed. Thank you. Any further public comment in the room? Anybody? Okay, we're going to go ahead and close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? It has been moved by Representative Burkhardt, seconded by Representative Larson. Any discussion? Representative Angelos, do you have a question? Any amendments? All right. Question being called. Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Angelos?
Aye.
Representative Burkhart?
Aye.
Representative Byron?
Aye.
Representative Larson? Representative Singh?
Aye.
Representative Storer?
Aye.
Chairman Western? Representative Winter? And Madam Chairman Newsom is excused. 8 aye, 1 excused.
Excellent. Senate File 87 has passed House TRW. Representative Provenza, I assume you will be managing this from the floor? Excellent. All right, the next bill for our consideration is Senate File 106, Large Project Funding. Take us away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the large project funding from the Select Committee for the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust, which I serve on. We have 9 large projects in this bill. This is something we see every year. I will say, and I'll let Director Bud kind of walk you through what those projects are to give you some background. I think they're great projects. I think people in your districts will think they're great projects. But one thing to point out to you when looking at this, you'll see, so the first example of it is in this this project sponsored Teton County on page 3. You've got the total project budget, looks like a big scary number on lines 13 through 15. And then we find out it's actually not that big of a scary number by looking at what the board is actually appropriating. Like I said earlier, sometimes we have projects that are a 34-to-1 match. So you've got, for every dollar that the board is spending, you've got $34 that are spent to match that. So throughout the bill, you'll see we've got total project budget versus what we're actually is the appropriation of the board. So it's not coming from general funds, it's coming from the board. But because of our statutes, when we created this, our statutes gave some oversight to the committee. So that's just a brief overview of what this is. And if any questions, I'll stand for. And I assume Director Bud also has some comments for you.
Mr. Bud?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. As Representative Provenza said, this is an annual, we bring this every year. It's the ones that meet that threshold. If I could, I would like to point out that the room is fairly full today because we had our actual board meeting, our winter board meeting today, where we meet with all of our partners and everything. So I have a number of board members here and hope you'll welcome them. All of these projects go through a fairly rigorous process. We get the applications, and it's in the materials I gave you, but I know you don't have a lot of time to read. So I'll paraphrase that. They come in, they're ranked by every member reads every project application and ranks each one of them. Then those go back to the board in April and in October, and they decide which of those they want to look at in the field. Everything that gets funded has been visited in the field. That was one of the feedback we had today from our partners, was that this is the only program that has that level of detail, and that they really appreciate that. Those that are selected as a large project then go to the select committee consisting of 3 members of the House, 3 members of the Senate, and they go through the process of reviewing each of those. What we look at in that review is financial. We look at legal, we look at permitting, we look at whether or not they are a feasible project. We look at the biological value, what you get back from it, and then it comes to you for your approval. So that's where we are with that. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to walk through the projects if you'd like. If you're challenged by time, we can let people ask about them individually, but whatever your pleasure, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bud, I think maybe just kind of go over them briefly, if that's okay. I think we're doing all right on time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can do that. The first is the Teton Migration Project. This is on Teton Pass west of Jackson. The primary species that this will impact is moose. A moose and auto collision is a devastating event for the moose and the car owner, and sometimes more than that. It's a huge project. It combines with a highway project. That's why that total cost is so high, about a $35 million project. This is $1 million to do the wildlife piece, which is the fencing and the underpass. That project already has $1 million in it that Teton County has raised. We are holding those funds for them. So you'll see the appropriation will be for $2 million. That's $1 million of their money and $1 million of the trust money. So that's what that project is. It'll also include deer and elk and bighorn sheep, but the primary beneficiary is moose. And and as all of you know, our moose populations in that part of the state are in pretty dire straits. So anything we can do will help. The second project is a fishhook conservation easement in Carbon County. This project is mainly funded right now by mitigation funds for Carbon County, where Rocky Mountain Power's power line went through. They've allocated almost $2 million to this project. So we're picking up a fairly small portion of it. This ranch has a large sage-grouse lek, which is their breeding area, on it and adjacent on a state lease that they have. They have breeding habitat. They have crucial mule deer winter range. They have a big chunk of the migration corridor that runs through the Saratoga Valley. And then they have all of the benefits that are associated with the river corridor itself. They have wintering bald and golden eagles. They have summering sandhill cranes, geese, ducks, waterfowl, and then the fishery itself. 13.32 stream miles, 1,200 acres, and a high leverage of 7-to-1. Third project is the Lakeview Canal in Park County. This is a major irrigation diversion that entrains a number of fish. The estimates are that it could be as many as 44,000 fish per year that go down that canal and not into the river. This project, the portion that this would pay for is the fisheries-related portion, which will divert those fish back to the river, maintain the irrigation infrastructure, and maintain the integrity of those agricultural operations that rely on it. We've done a lot of these. And as I said, it's a partnership with water development with the irrigation district, and this will pay for the fishery cost. The fourth is the Wind River Indian Reservation feral horse removal. This, as most of you probably will remember last year, this was funded by the legislature for one gather. This particular appropriation would be to match the legislative appropriation from last year. They've gathered 2,000 horses this year. They're done as far as they can go. But the horses are now in bighorn sheep summer range. So we're talking 10,000 feet where those sheep really need to be on a high plane of nutrition. They're now having to compete with thousands of feral horses. It's a great partnership with the reservation. It's a great partnership with the legislature. And this one is funded by the Wyoming Wild Sheep Foundation. They've raised 130,000 of that. Each gather costs about 400,000. This would bring us to the full cost of another gather. So that's what this one does. Next is the SR Cattle Company easement in Sheridan County. This is directly west of town, right at the foot of the Bighorns. It's abutted by other conservation easements, which makes it very significant as it relates to mule deer, sharp-tailed grouse, fisheries, all of those different species that utilize those habitats in riparian areas. It's a historic ranching operation. They want to keep it in ranching and not see that be subdivided. Next is a Sims Creek Slough. This is next in a long line of projects that we've done on the Bear River. Some of you are aware that the Bear River Cutthroat is petitioned for listing on a fairly regular basis. One of the reasons that they cite in doing that is that they can't access their historic spawning range. Anytime we remove a fish barrier that allows them to get into those historic spawning ranges, that argument carries less water. So this one is another one of those. It's a natural stream function. You rebuild the river. You maintain the irrigation infrastructure in a way that it can deliver water usually more efficiently. A lot of these are old push-up dams where somebody gets in the river with a bulldozer, putting themselves at considerable risk with EPA, and then pushes that rock up and then knocks it down when they're done. So this would put in structures that allow that water to be diverted and allow fish to get through that barrier. Next is the Little Medicine River. This is north of Medicine Bow on the Little Medicine. This is one of the most pristine prairie ecosystems in Wyoming and perhaps in North America. And this one is a comprehensive project. This also has funding from Rocky Mountain Power Mitigation Funds. This one, we're working on the river portion from the headwaters clear to the town of Medicine Bow. In addition, there are projects that are coupled with this on uplands for water distribution, for fence modification. It's in an area where pronghorn in particular are using that year round. It's a mule deer range, but more importantly, perhaps as we look at things like listings, this is prime sage grouse habitat. And there are a number of leks, a number of birds out there. It's a great project. It's been going on for a long time. Next is the Ellsbury Ranch easement. Mr. Ellsbury is in the room, and I hope you'll get a chance to hear from him, but this is in the Black Hills. And the species of interest there, for those of you who are familiar with the Black Hills, it is quite a spectacular little piece of North America. It has a merging of a lot of different ecosystems, so you get things that you don't find anywhere else. It's a project that will benefit mule deer, elk, turkey, migratory songbirds, a lot of which we don't have anywhere else in the state, reptiles and amphibians, and like the other, it maintains a historic family homestead ranch operation and keeps it in agriculture. Finally, Mr. Chairman, New Fork 351. 351 is the highway. That's why that number's there. That's where it is. This is, again, an irrigation infrastructure combined with a river restoration project. This is a very old historic site on the Oregon Trail. It will rebuild or reconnect an island there by taking what got channelized into one stream back to its original configuration of two. It benefits mule deer, fish, moose, sage grouse, waterfowl, and migratory songbirds, as well as the irrigation infrastructure for the users who are downstream. Mr. Chairman, that's a very brief look at the projects. I'd be happy to answer if the people have specific questions or you want more detail, we'd be happy to do that. Or there are proponents for these projects in the room that have even more intimate knowledge, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Budd. Committee, any questions? Don, or excuse me, Chairman Burkhart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, Director Budd. In the past, on these projects, you furnished the legislature with, I guess, a PowerPoint of what the projects look like, exactly where they are. Will you be doing that again this year?
Mr. Chairman, you should have that in the materials that I gave you in a written form.
Oh, okay. Sorry,
Chairman
it's
Burkhart,
under,
I think,
yeah.
I believe it was House staff that sent out that PowerPoint, I think last night, maybe it was yesterday, I have
Yes.
to check. But
Okay.
it should be in
thank
our
you.
inbox somewhere.
I stand corrected. Thank you.
Committee, any additional questions? I guess I do have, Mr. Budd, one brief question. I know we kind of mentioned it, but I think it might be good just for the edification of the committee about, some of the criteria you use about the quality of the habitat, whether it be for, habitat for mule deer or for sage grouse or that kind of stuff. Maybe walk us through that criteria and that methodology of identifying that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to do that. Thank you. We have a score sheet that we developed that's basically 100 points with, there are some bonus, there's 110 total if you go through it. And it has it's a matrix of different characteristics that we look at in each project. Viability, will it work? Is this money gonna be well spent? Biological integrity. It has partnerships. Is everybody who should be at the table? Fiscal, do we have enough matching funds? We average about $6 or $7 to 1 for what we put into every project. has all of those. The one I think you're more interested in is the biological component. And what we look at on any project, when we get the application, we'll have all the overlays of what habitats are there. So if it's crucial mule deer winter range, it'll show what part of the ranch or what part of the project is crucial range. If it has overlays for migration, for crucial habitat, sage grouse leks, breeding areas. We have fisheries data on a lot of them. We will have some of the applications, if you act for the backup data, it'll be 1 inch to 2 inches thick when you look at all of the information that's out there. What that does is let the board evaluate those and say, okay, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, where does this one fit in? That doesn't necessarily play out that you would fund it or not. It actually plays out more how much value you put into it and how much funding you might apply. So a project that has minimal value, you're not going to put the same amount of state resource into that you would which one that has, you know, crucial mule deer winter range, crucial elk range, sage grouse leks, summer breeding habitat, you know, those kind of things. They're going to rise to the top and probably you're going to be willing to put more into them. But it's a very extensive. We use overlays from vegetation. We have all kinds of data that feeds into that. And when you do the site visit, you're going through that on site so you can actually look at it and say, is this really crucial mule deer winter range? Well, if you're standing in a bunch of bitter brush and sagebrush on a ridge that blows off in the winter, it pretty well is. And so it's a very rigorous process. A site visit will take sometimes all day, sometimes half a day. And they're done always by 2 of us, myself and a board member, 2 board members. Sometimes we'll do more than that. There's a photo in the annual report from this summer where we went and did a site visit with the select committee, the board, and all of the partners. So is that, Mr.
That's excellent, Mr. Budd. Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none. Oh, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the Teton County project relative to the moose and where they're really being affected?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Budd.
Representative Winter, this is right at the base of Teton Pass. So as you go west out of Jackson, that area just past, it's Wilson, isn't it? Just past there, there's a bunch of streams come through there and everything, and that's where the moose are. And so as they cross that highway back and forth with the traffic that's coming from Idaho and particularly the downhill traffic, they're vulnerable as all get out. And I can't remember the numbers. Director Nesvik is here. He may be able to tell you the numbers of moose that we're losing, but it's significant. You know, they're not a large population. They're not overly productive as far as breeding. So you lose a cow moose, you're losing quite an asset. And this will give them access to not be on the highway. It'll fence the highway off so that we aren't getting those collisions with vehicles.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It looked like, could you explain the cost that you were talking about earlier? How it looks pretty expensive, and so I don't quite understand what.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, this one, we're fortunate in the sense that there's going to be highway resurfacing, highway reconstruction on that pass for the whole highway project. That whole highway project is tagged at $35 million. The $2 million that we have in here will pay for fencing, which, as you know, if you're going to keep them off the highway, is very, very expensive per foot. And then the box underpasses that the moose can use to get through. These have gone way up in price. If you look at what they cost, the one that's being contemplated on I-80, which is primarily for elk, antelope, and mule deer, is estimated to be between 30 and 40 million for that. This, as a component of the larger project, actually is cheaper than if we were to go in and retrofit it to an existing highway. So because it's part of that normal construction rebuild, all the disturbance will be there anyway. We can go in and do what we need to do, if you will, at cost. And that's why it's as low budget as it is when you look at 2 million. Another example would be the Dry Piney crossings. The cost of that was 21 million, I think was the total. So they're very expensive when you think concrete, you think fencing and all those materials.
Seeing no questions, thank you very much for your testimony. Obviously, stick around if you wouldn't mind. Let's go ahead. Is there any other state agencies, Game and Fish? Director Nesvik?
Good morning, members of the, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Brian Nesvik, Director of Wyoming Game and Fish. I'll be pretty brief, but I wanted to start by saying, you know, this model that Wyoming has for funding wildlife conservation across our state with the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust is the envy of many. And we have made a statement, I think, as a state to the entire country about the values that we place in wildlife and a conservative model to fund those projects by using savings and the interest off those savings to do some really cool things on the ground. This trust has significantly leveraged the ability that the department has to do good conservation work across the state. There are very few of our large projects that the commission approves, that Game and Fish takes the lead on, that do not have a Wildlife Natural Resource Trust component to them. They're not all, you know, some of them are smaller projects than what you heard of here today, but certainly all the projects that Director Budd discussed here today are, we have our hand in almost all of those. And this has been and continues to evolve with the funds that were allocated, appropriated last year by the legislature. Our abilities to continue to do great work on the ground have just been almost doubled. The last thing I would say is that as you know, we gathered several folks from around the state over the last about year and a half to study important wildlife issues, the Wyoming Wildlife Task Force. One of the things that every member of that task force was supportive of is continuing to use this model that we have reflected here with the Wyoming Natural Resource Trust. And with that, I'd stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee members, any questions? Representative Winter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, why did all these projects come up all at once? Is that just, it just happened, or have we been putting them off, or what's the history behind them?
Director Nesvik?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, certainly the need's always been there, but when all the needs can't be met because of fiscal capacity, you know, some projects were never even proposed, or a lot of times the amount of projects that can be funded, not just by the trust, but by the Game and Fish Commission, by other nonprofits, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. There's a long list of those nonprofits that fund this kind of work. The number of applications to do wildlife work on the ground is heavily influenced by the amount of funds there are to actually do the work. So if there's less funds, there's going to be less applications for projects. I will tell you that even with the significant investment that Wyoming makes now, we still are not coming close to meeting the need. There's significant need left unmet around the state, and I don't know that we can ever see the end of that. There's always going to be conservation work to be done on the ground. People in our state greatly value wildlife, as you're well aware, Representative Winter.
Follow up, Representative Winter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I guess maybe you've answered my question already, but it just seemed like there's a whole lot of projects here all of a sudden that have come up, and I don't understand why, unless it's money. I mean, if that's been the problem, why do we need to work on that from this end, or what's the reason for all of these projects all at once, I guess?
Director Nesvik?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Winter, there's always been a significant number of projects as long as the trust has been in place. I think that there have been increases, the need's been there. Like I said, the projects there have been ideas for wildlife work to be done on the ground. But those, there's only so many applications that can be, where the need can be met based on the amount of resources that are available. So when this past year, I can't say that this year is a significant increase from the year before, but if you look at it over a long period of time, I'm sure you would see an increase in the number of both applications and the number of approved projects not only with the trust, but with all conservation work. And I do think that's a result of increased availability of funds. And I will tell you that as time goes on and you look at the importance that this work has to the citizens of our state, I do believe that, over the long term, the legislature is going to have to continue to determine how they're going to meet that need. And allocation of resources to this trust is a good way to deal with the increasing need, and also just normal inflation that happens. I mean, the cost of doing business on this kind of work is it's no different than going and buying a gallon of milk at the store. Everything's gone up.
Seeing no further questions, I guess before we turn it over to public testimony, would you maybe come back up and just, for the committee, introduce your board members and tell us who they are?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If I may, can I expand on
go ahead.
Representative Winter, your question? The number actually is fairly constant that we do every year. It's about 60 to 80 projects. Early on, it was more, but you had a lot of little projects. There are two things that have happened that change why you're seeing more of them. One is inflation. You're seeing projects that would not have cost $200,000 5 years ago. The other is that we're trying to operate at a much greater scale. So when somebody comes in and says, I want to fix this little thing, we oftentimes will go back to them and say, no, you need to get a complete watershed plan. We're going to do it all, and we'll know what it's going to cost. So you're seeing projects like that. So if you look at the ones in this one, as an example, the Lakeview Canal, that's inflation driven. That would have been done probably, a few years ago, we'd have been in a different number. The others are scale driven. So you have both of those. That's why you have more this year than you're used to seeing. With that, Mr. Chairman, let me ask my board members to stand up if they would, please. Esther Wagner from Casper, that they're appointed by judicial districts. Esther, and they're very diverse. Esther is involved in the oil and gas industry. Ken Bannister from Torrington represents the eastern side of the state. Ken is an original member. He's going off this year. He served 18 years and was one of our charter members. He's a curmudgeon, but he's been a great asset to us and has served that entire time. One of the early founders of the two-shot goose hunt in Goshen County, a sportsman. Don Schramm from Rock Springs, retired from the BLM and it works for Rock Springs Grazing Association. Has a background in surveying and engineering. Christy Haswell from Sheridan. You all know Commissioner Haswell, I think, in another role, but Christy worked in natural resources for a number of years and has been a great addition to this board. Pidge Fulton from Powell. Pidge is a farmer. He only farms part-time because he's actually a fisherman, and he's a really good fisherman. And Mike Massey in the back from Laramie. Mike was actually one of the co-sponsors of the act that created the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust and serves. We're missing two of them today, but they have good excuses. They're both in a warm place, as I understand their excuse. But there's an awesome board. It's an honor to work with these people, and the state really needs to realize how much value you get out of them because they're the ones out on the ground doing this, and they get paid nothing. They're phenomenal people, and I'm very proud to work with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I guess with that, we'll open up to public testimony. Anybody who would like to come up and testify before this? Please come forward. Just if you wouldn't mind, just state your name and who you're with.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Jessica Crowder. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Stock Growers Land Trust. Thank you for taking the time to hear us this morning. I won't take too much of your time because we do have Mr. Ellsbury here, and I know he has some prepared remarks for you. At the Stock Growers Land Trust, we are privileged to work with landowners who are interested in conserving their agricultural lands and really enjoy working with the WWNRT in that partnership as well. And our goal is to preserve Wyoming's working agricultural lands And it's really great to be able to meet the needs and the goals of these landowners who are interested in preserving that legacy, as well as preserving the conservation and wildlife values that exist on these lands. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ellsbury to speak, and I'll remain here in case you have questions. Thank you.
Mr. Ellsbury.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to thank you guys for your service to the great state of Wyoming. I appreciate that. And my great-grandfather, Lyman Henry Ellsbury, homesteaded my ranch as a young man in 1884. In 1915, he served in this very capital as a representative, just like you. I only wish I could have known him. Special guy. Well, my ranch lies in the Bear Lodge Mountains of the Black Hills. It's not as majestic as the Tetons. It's not as spectacular as Yellowstone. It's not as immense as the Bighorns. But the Bear Lodge has been hidden. It's been a hidden gem all by itself, and it's not been fully recognized until now. Well, my grandpa Mert took over the ranch in the 20s, and he was able to expand through the 30s. And he had a sizable holding, and in 1950, my dad, Tracy, and his brother, they assumed ownership. Through acquisition of more land, they successfully operated the ranch into the 1990s when my uncle died. Then, sadly, the ranch was split in half. At that time, that half would support a family. But my father endeared to me to never let that happen again. We can't split it any longer. And my mother backed him up wholeheartedly because her family ranch is now split into 40-acre ranchettes all over the place. Well, now I have the reins of the ranch. And I would like to have more land so my sons can make a decent living on it. We have to lease other land to make it work. And now my 5th generation is running the ranch, and my 6th generation, my grandsons and granddaughters too, they're on the ranch. But I'd like to expand, but I cannot begin to afford the exorbitant price of land today. Perhaps if the ranch hadn't been given to my great-grandfather by President Abraham Lincoln, perhaps if he hadn't given it to my grandfather, and perhaps if he hadn't given it to my father, and perhaps if he hadn't given it to me, perhaps I wouldn't give it to my children and my grandchildren, and so on. Perhaps I could just sell it and buy cheap land elsewhere. But the monetary value of this land is not important. The true value of the land lies in its ability to provide sustenance. Its true value is in its intrinsic beauty. And the true value is also in the unscathed landscape with deer, coyotes, elk, mountain lion, antelope, bear, eagle, turkeys, and an occasional moose. And they're able to run wild and free on my open ranch, unencumbered by ranchettes. Well, unscrupulous developers, along with eager buyers, are encroaching on my ranch at an alarming rate. But through the Wyoming Stock Growers Land Trust conservation easement, I have already ensured that my ranch will remain in its current condition, never to be fragmented or developed in any way, only to remain in agricultural use for perpetuity. And as always, the land will remain as crucial habitat for all the wildlife. And I have graciously received support from the Forest Service and Wyoming Game and Fish. But as an added bonus, it'll be any monetary funds I receive from the stock growers or from the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resource Trust, it'll be put in a corpus fund, essentially the same way the Natural Resource Trust works now. Put it in this fund, and I can use that to purchase more land to make a contiguous block around my own. I have a place I've been leasing for 20 years that will soon come for sale. And I'd like to have the opportunity to buy it, but when in the current land value situation, I can't do it. But by your support, we can ensure the conservation and preservation of yet another piece of land. Not large by Wyoming standards, it's only 4 square miles. But we can also put that in the Wyoming stock growers' repertoire of open space. Well, I for one, I'm appalled when I see a piece of Wyoming being built upon or paved over. And you know what they call that? It's the highest and best use. No, that isn't the highest and best use. But if I were a profiteer, a scrupulous developer, I could develop and sell my land right now for tens of millions of dollars. But more important to me and my family is to provide land for the wildlife and the livestock to thrive upon. Well, I'm sure my Grandpa Hank would be proud that his descendants have kept the land in pristine condition. And I'm sure that my ancestors, they're proud for keeping that tradition alive. And I am very proud to continue on. Thank you. But let me end with a quote by an old Indian chief. His name was Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull said, "We do not own the land. We only borrow it from our children." Think about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ellsbury. I might push back a little bit in your remarks about the Black Hills, because I think the Black Hills are a mighty fine place. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other public testimony? Mr. McGagnon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with Wyoming Stock Growers Association. As I sit here, I'm just reflecting a bit and want to share that reflection. We were instrumental in the creation of the Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust so many years ago. And as I look back on all the projects that have been undertaken as a result of that over these years, we all talk about the benefit to our wildlife community, and that certainly is obvious. But I think about the benefit to our ranching community and our agricultural economy in the state of Wyoming that has come as a result of those projects. The direct ones, conservation easements, of course, as you've already heard, will help to assure that family ranches, multi-generation ranches are able to continue for years to come. That's critically important. But even beyond that, a lot of the projects having to do with water development that have helped farmers and ranchers in that manner, projects having to do with resource enhancement for wildlife. It's very rare that a project that benefits wildlife through resource enhancement doesn't also benefit cattle or sheep through ranching enhancement. So we think this has been a win for wildlife in the state of Wyoming, a win for agriculture, and a win for the state of Wyoming. Would encourage your support of this legislation and of these types of efforts in the future. With that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McGagnon. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. One last chance. Any further public testimony? All right, so we're going to go ahead and close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure? It has been moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Storr. Committee, any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Burkhart.
Thank you. Just to address a previous issue, from my time on transportation, Highway 22 going west out of Jackson up over the pass is the heaviest used two-lane road in the state. And this work needs to be done up there. I know our Department of Transportation will love to make that a 4-lane highway. That won't happen for quite a while, but we need to protect these animals and the people that travel that. And I would suggest if you don't believe me, go up and even in the middle of the day, it is literally bumper to bumper in both directions. So just a comment.
Members, anybody else? Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've had some concerns about these conservation easements for some time. It seems to me that they really tend to limit what a private landowner can do. And I don't see where there's any way out of them. Once you sign up, why you're kind of obligated from then on. And I may be wrong about this, but that's always been my thoughts. And so I just wondered if any of you gentlemen or ladies know anything different.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Burkhart.
I think I can maybe address that issue. These conservation easements are not mandated. The landowners volunteer. They may be approached by someone saying, would you consider this? But it's ultimately a decision that the private landowner makes with their own land. The same as they would allow hunting or not allow hunting. Allow someone to, lease their meadow for hay for a while. It's a private decision. It's up to the landowner. And frankly, some of these easements may be the only way that the original owner stays on their own land and is able to ranch it for generations to come. No one is forcing a landowner to enter a conservation easement. This is all voluntary.
Representative Winter, any further discussion? I will add certainly that at the end of the day, if we're about private enterprise, it's willing buyer, willing seller. I think at the end of the day, landowners do have that right to have that encumbrance on there. So long as that gets disclosed in a potential sale, that's something that the buyer has to accept. I mean, there's kind of the buyer's beware belief that you have to know what you're getting into and assuming that we're all transacting in transparent and equal information. So there's no further discussion or any amendments. Question be called. Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Angelos?
Aye.
Representative Burkhart?
Aye.
Representative Byron?
Aye.
Representative Larson?
Aye.
Representative Singh?
Aye.
Representative Storer?
Aye.
Chairman Western?
Aye.
Representative Winter? And Madam Chairman Newsom, aye by absentee. 9 ayes.
Senate File 106 has passed House TRW. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Ellsberg. We appreciate your testimony. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 58, I believe. Senator Ellis, are you here to present Senate File 58? That would be excellent. Of course. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you, you have Senate File 58, which is the Sutton Archaeological Site Administration. This bill comes as a result of some work that your TRW committee did in the 2022 interim. And before we begin discussing the bill, I did want to offer this to committee members. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to visit with the state archaeologist who was conducting a dig site right next to, or parcel adjacent to the Sutton Archaeological Site. And you might not be aware, Wyoming is one of the rare places that has a red ochre mine. And so I'll leave this jar with you. It's been on my desk all during the session. It is not human remains. I had permission from the state
That's
archaeologist
reassuring.
to actually put this in a bag. So I didn't loot technically, but it's this really cool dirt that's it's highly mineralized, but it looks a little bit like mineral makeup when you put it on your skin. And so when I toured this with my kids, there were a group of archaeologists in this giant hole. They were covered in this dirt and they literally look like bronze statues working. They have, fossils, arrowheads, and all kinds of other cool things that are covered in this dirt, and they have this real pearlescent quality to them. So I'll leave this with you. I know you're not allowed to use props on the floor. I invited all of my Senate colleagues to open the jar, rub it on their skin if they like. So I'd offer that to you as just a really unique, special place in Wyoming. But along those lines, and I'll let State Parks kind of dive into the details a bit more, there was an area adjacent to this red ochre mine, which was gifted to the state of Wyoming a number of years ago. The Office of, or the State Parks Department has done something where they do a site criteria process, looking at the land for potential uses for it or designations. And so in doing that, they determined that it would be appropriate to create this as an archaeological site. And so they can talk a little bit more of why they reached that determination. But as we had this conversation in the Senate, there are concerns about looting, people being unaware that this parcel is, not just necessarily open to the public, and honestly having concerns about looting and taking some items that might be of some significance. So as we looked at this issue in the interim, we decided to create this as a state archaeological site. If you look at the section in our statute, which currently has this placed, this would simply add a new Romanet 3. The other two archaeological sites we have on the books are Legend Rock, which is in Hot Springs County, and Medicine Lodge, which you should be very familiar with. There was concern on the Senate side that, we might have archaeologists driving around Wyoming and all of a sudden wanting to donate or designate sites. That's not the case. This is really limited to a site that we already have owned. And so I think it is an appropriate question of what should we do with it? Should it be state parks where people can camp on it? Should it be state lands that should generate revenue? Or does it have other special properties? And so we landed on it being an archaeological site. But I know State Parks is here to testify, as well as Representative Haroldson. When State Parks did their site criteria process, he was heavily involved in that. So I'll let him speak on his experience. But just wanted you to know this, I think, is a good little bill, not without its own controversy and considerations, but would hope you give it a favorable look. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Ellis. Committee members, any questions? If I might, Chairwoman Ellis, just kind of looking at the engrossed version versus the introduced version in the Senate, just looks like it pulls out the appropriation. Is that the difference? Or if you might touch on that for me, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If my recollection serves, we actually just moved up the effective date to be effective immediately. So initially we thought July 1st, and you do that so that the public has an opportunity to have notice. We do July 1st usually so that when we are reprinting off the green books, that our publishers have time to incorporate that. But we changed it to immediately because the authorization State Parks would use, they're able to absorb their existing money to put up signs, put up cameras, but they couldn't do any of that work unless we made it immediate. So if we left it at July 1st, they'd have to wait until July before they could begin putting those security measures in place. That was the only change to my recollection.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Members, any questions? Thank you very much. Obviously, please do stick around in case we have more questions. State agencies, or Representative Haroldson, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and TRW. So I had the opportunity this site is in my district, and it's kind of unique in a way. If you've never been to little Hartville, Wyoming, I recommend it. And John Voigt is the neighbor that borders this property and took over the old Sunrise mine. Got to give you a little history. It would be my grandfather-in-law was foreman of the mine and ran that YMCA there and ran their bowling team. So I've got a little bit of history in that country. And so it's actually, if you've never been up there, I recommend a tour. It's very well worth it. We have one of 2 red ochre mines in the world that have been known, which is really unique, and the Powers 2 site's amazing. But out beyond that, there's this large glory hole, and above that on the hill is the Sutton parcel. So we had 2 Johns, John Sutton and John Voigt. John Sutton, upon his death, gave this property to the state of Wyoming with the intention that it be used for archaeological purposes. And so we have a couple ways we could do that. You could put it through the university, you could do all sorts of different things, but I do believe this is the best path. At the beginning of the session, we had a little bit of concern that from John Voigt that this was not the proper way to go about it. And so he voiced a little concern to myself. We had a great conversation with him. He's very much on board. He believes that this is the best way moving forward. He's willing to work with Parks, wants to work with Parks. And so I will be involved in that. If this bill moves out of committee across the floor and obviously across the governor's desk, I will be working with Parks as well as John to make sure that that transition is seamless and we get to put this kind of in the history books as an opportunity to preserve a beautiful site. So definitely on and for the bill, been involved with the bill from the beginning and just really can't say enough about how the parks have worked to make sure that the adjacent landowners, their rights are preserved and we preserve this site. So would stand for any questions, but definitely on and for it.
Members, any questions for Representative Haroldson? Seeing none, thank you. State agencies, feel free to weigh in.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Nick Nealon, Deputy Director of State Parks. Yeah, as Representative Haroldson and Senator Ellis said, this is something that's in our wheelhouse. We run 2 archaeological sites already. There is no appropriation. You had a question about the appropriation. This is all going to be funded using our special revenue account. We anticipate that the entire cost of the project, from the fencing to the cameras to the signage, to be a little bit less than $200,000, which is a cost that we can allocate funds for. As Representative Haroldson said, we've had some great conversations with the folks there locally and really look forward to working with them and in particular with their group that's working at the town of Sunrise. We think we could create some excellent partnerships and help preserve that really special area together.
Thank you very much. Mr. Nealon, did I get that? Committee members, any questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative
Question,
Burkhart?
please. So I'm unclear. What's the archaeological significance of the Sutton site, please?
Mr. Nealon, or
Whoever.
My name is Carly Ann Carruthers. I'm the Planning and Grants Manager for State Parks. The archaeological significance of this site, being adjacent to the Ochre Mine, is a little yet to be determined. The last study on the site was, I think, completed in 1986. So there is some documentation on the parcel at the State Historic Preservation Office, but it's just good practice to go back after that amount of time has passed and get up to date on what new research has brought to the table. What we will say is that there are some very unique structures up there and some larger than usual stone circles. A lot of people are familiar with stone circles, and they're usually related to habitation, a teepee ring. And in this case, we have a larger circle on the property, and so we're interested to see how that might connect to adjacent sites.
Mr. Chairman, also, we've involved.
Mr. Nealon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Spencer Pelton, who's the state archaeologist, has been heavily involved in the site criteria process and the determination that this is a site that should be protected, and we're the agency to do that.
Any follow-up? Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, team. I'm just curious what kind of management you envision for the site.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we envision protection of the site. Our goal is to get up there and to, again, put up some fences, put up some signs, put up cameras to protect the site. work with the local group up there to try to find ways to incorporate what they have with what we might have. And then long-term, look at things we might do. And I mean, 5 to 10 years down the road and longer. We've had conversations with the TIPOs from the tribes, at least one of whom was involved in the site criteria process, or maybe not an official member, but was there at the site during the process. And we want to work closely with them to determine what the proper use of the site is. And that's going to take a long time to figure out.
Well, thank you.
Representative Storer, any follow-up? Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman.
Chairwoman Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add for new members of the committee, TIPO is Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. We have a SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office or Officer. Tribes each have their own. And then along those lines, in working on this bill, it's a TRW sponsored bill, but we also discussed it during our Select Committee on Tribal Relations. And I believe both TIPOs in Wyoming and beyond were contacted. It is important to note, if you're familiar with this area, these are traditional home grounds of a lot of tribes. It's near the Fort Laramie site, which was occupied by, 14 plus maybe different tribes. So I think there's a lot to learn. But the state parks has existing relationships with TIPOs, and that's how they'd be involved in as they discover things.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Maybe just stick around just in case we do have more questions. Any public comment in the room? Seeing none. Any online? Okay. Yeah, please do come on up. Just introduce yourself, state your name and who you're with.
My name is Shauna Reichert, and I'm the Executive Director of the Putnam County Chamber of Commerce and a member of the Sunrise Historic and Prehistoric Archaeological Society that is up there at Sunrise. What we do know about the site that's actually in Sunrise is some of the oldest Clovis points that have been found in North America have been found in that location. So there is probably a good chance that we will find something like that at the Sutton parcel as well.
Members, any questions for Ms. Reichert? Seeing none. Thank you very much for your
You're
testimony. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close public testimony. Committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Representative Singh, seconded by the fastest second in the West, Representative Larson. Committee, any discussion? Any amendments? Question being called. Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Angelos?
Aye.
Representative Burkhart?
Aye.
Representative Byron?
Aye.
Representative Larson?
Aye.
Representative Singh?
Aye.
Representative Storer?
Aye.
Chairman Western?
Aye.
Representative Winter? And Madam Chairman Newsom, aye by absentee.
Excellent. Senate File 58 has passed. House TRW. Representative Haraldson, I assume you'll be managing this on the floor? I could, I will. Absolutely. The next Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 178. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, we have Senate File 178. This deals with mountain lion pursuit seasons in the state of Wyoming. So as it currently stands, if you are going to hunt a mountain lion, once you actually fill a tag, you have to stop hunting. And this is problematic due to the how much training it takes, especially canines, to assist in these hunts. And so what the bill would do is allow a separate season administered by the Game and Fish to just allow for the pursuit of mountain lions, keeping the dogs sharp and on their, kind of on their A game. I guess that's the goal. There's also benefits to our ag community. And that's frankly the reason why I'm running the bill is, if you make sure that, teach these lions some respect for canines and humans, they're less likely to harass your pets, your livestock, and even people in some rare instances. So certainly, I think a good bill that helps both our outdoor economy. It helps make sure that when they do fill a tag with a mountain lion tag, it's done in as humane manner as possible. There's not as, if the dogs are well trained, that it's more likely to be a good hunt. And also, like I said, it helps just keep these lines from predating on livestock as well. So that's the idea behind the bill. Pretty simple, straightforward piece of legislation. You'll see on page 2, it's directing the Game and Fish Commission to establish a mountain lion pursuit season as they see fit. It's going to be vary by area, and of course, some areas there's year-round mountain lion hunting. Obviously, that's not going to be have a huge impact on those areas, but then there's areas where it's only part of the year. I have to have a permit in order to participate in this pursuit season. And then we just have forming amendments on bottom of page 2, making sure that, if you knowingly kill a mountain lion during the pursuit season, that's obviously, that's not good. So I'll make sure that doesn't happen. Forming amendments on the top of page 4 as well. So it allows for emergency rulemaking, it looks like, effective date of July 1. That's basically the bill. I know Game and Fish has some amendments. I don't know if you have them with the committee right now, but it was pretty straightforward. I'll let them explain that. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Burkhart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Senator, I just need to be clear. This pursuit season would be outside of the regular mountain lion season or concurrent with it, or what? I'm not clear.
Senator Voter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It could be both depending on the area. If you're still in the season and you fill your tag, you'd be able to continue even during the season. But then again, it could be extended outside the season as well. I believe both are possibilities, Mr. Chairman, and I imagine the administration would vary depending on the exact circumstances in a particular area.
Follow up? Representative Storr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Boner. I just am not aware of what the seasons are for mountain lion in the different parts of the state. I wonder if you could share that with us.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to,
Senator Bonner.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to, defer to Game and Fish because, like I said, it varies depending on the area. I didn't sit down and memorize what every last mountain lion season is before I present this bill.
Follow up? Any other questions? Thank you very much, Senator. Obviously, please do stick around in case further questions come up.
Absolutely.
Let's go to state agencies. Game and Fish. Mr. King? Mr. Nesvik?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Again, Brian Nesvik, Director of Wyoming Game and Fish. So I'm accompanied here today by the Chief Game Warden, Rick King, and he's got the wheel on this one, so I'm going to turn the mic over to him.
Mr. King?
Chairman Western, members of the committee, my name's Rick King, Chief Game Warden for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today about this bill. I'll just give you a little bit of background. The Game and Fish Commission has heard from houndsmen across the state that they'd like to have this opportunity to continue to pursue mountain lions even after they've harvested a lion on their mountain lion license. And so in looking at that opportunity, it seemed pretty clear that the commission really should have a structure and framework in place provided by the legislature to ensure that the commission has that authority to enact such a pursuit season. So that's the bill that you see in front of you, provides that structure and framework that the commission can establish those pursuit seasons. I'll just quickly touch on mountain lion management in the state. The state has roughly about 30 mountain lion hunt areas. The state's divided into hunt areas. The season dates range from year-round to September 1 to March 31 in some cases they're open year-round. Almost all the hunt areas in the state have a mortality limit. So the season's open those entire dates or until a mortality limit is reached. We evaluate those mortality limits every 3 years and then readjust those mortality limits on a 3-year cycle. So I do have one amendment. It's relatively simple. That's to simply change the word "to" to "may" on page 2, line 3. And with that, I'll stand for any questions that you might have.
Members, any questions for Game and Fish? Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Director. My question is, so on page 4, line 5, it references the commission shall regulate the use of dogs to take mountain lions and bobcats, and then in addition, and to pursue mountain lions. So how will this new season affect our bobcat population as it differentiates from mountain lions?
Mr. King.
Yeah, Chairman Western, Representative Singh. So currently we have a bobcat season. It opens November 15th. A person has to be licensed to harvest bobcats. By statute, a person can use hounds to pursue and harvest bobcats. Under this bill, there really isn't anything that'll change in terms of bobcat management. This is strictly establishing a pursuit-only season for mountain lions. So current bobcat management will remain the same.
Follow-up, Representative Singh.
Thank you, that's all.
Representative Burkhardt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Director King, I guess this is kind of hunt and release. So I guess my concern is, or not so much concern, just information. Will we get into a situation with the lions like we have on some of the rivers that are heavily floated for fish where, you know, there's so much catch and release? I've seen fish that almost literally don't even have any jaws anymore. Are we going to harass the lions to that point, do you think?
Mr. King.
Chairman Western, Representative Burkhardt, I appreciate the question. I think that's a valid concern. And I think that through promulgating rules and regulations, I think the commission needs to take that into consideration. And while I don't have specifically what they may do to address that concern in rule and reg, I think they'll have the opportunity to potentially address that concern. Maybe it's a limitation on the length of the season that this pursuit season would be in place. But that kind of flexibility, I think it will exist with rule and reg to address that.
Follow-up. Representative Storer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A bit of a follow-up to Chairman Burkhardt's question. I guess just trying to understand the reason for the current seasons. Does this relate to the breeding season? I'm just trying to understand what activities might be allowed that currently aren't allowed and at what time of year.
Mr. King.
Representative Western, Chairman Western, sorry, Representative Storer. Yeah, another good question. What I would envision the commission would probably entertain is a pursuit season that's season dates that are concurrent with the current hunting season. So while this would be the commission's prerogative, I think those dates would likely be concurrent. And what happens now is that a person, if they go out and pursue a lion, they have a license, and then they harvest a lion on that license, then they no longer have the opportunity to continue to run their dogs and to keep them sharp and to keep them trained. And a lot of these houndsmen have a lot of time and money and energy invested into their dogs. And that's really what they like to do, is to be out there. And so with this opportunity, the commission could then establish a mechanism for those folks to continue to stay in the field with their dogs. But I don't envision something that is much different than what the current framework is in terms of dates that a person will be out in the field. Does that answer your question?
Representative Storer.
Just one follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is putting this in statute required to make this possible?
Mr. King.
Chairman Western, Representative Storer, I believe so. This was something that was discussed and discussed, and ultimately it felt like it was necessary to come to the legislature and just make sure that this opportunity and this framework is well established in statute for the commission to go down the road of establishing these pursuit seasons.
Any further questions? Okay. Mr. King, I did have one question. I think obviously my name's on the bill, so I support the idea. The one concern I did kind of think about would be that you know, obviously some, especially in the case of deer, those kind of things, that January, February, March, that's when they're most vulnerable, right? They're burning through their fat reserves to survive. And I just want to make sure, obviously, that this would potentially, you know, create a situation where we're running off mule deer, whether it's by a mountain lion or by hunters, or, you know, accidentally bumping deer. Do you think there's any sort of additional language that could be added that might, you know, say at the commission's discretion, may take into these factors in mind when setting these kind of catch and release seasons? Do you think that would be helpful at all? Mr. King?
Chairman Western, I don't think that's necessary. I think the way this is structured is that the commission would have adequate flexibility to address that if that was a concern. So I don't see the need for any additional language.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no questions, thank you very much. Please do stick around just in case we have more. Any other state agencies? I guess we'll move on to public comment. A couple of folks, Ms. Johnson. Obviously, we know who you are, but if you wouldn't mind, just state your name.
Vice Chair Western, members of the committee, Jess Johnson, Government Affairs Director of the Wyoming Wildlife Federation. And we stand in very favorable support of this bill. I think, you know, the way that we look at these seasons and every communication I have had with houndsmen, I've worked a lot with the Wyoming Houndsman Association, who I know will be on Zoom to testify as well. What they're asking for is this pursuit season within the already allotted seasons. They're not looking for expanded wildly outside of that. They're looking so that they have the opportunity, and the way that we see this as Wyoming Wildlife Federation is this is an ethics bill. This is actually helpful because if you have dogs that are well trained and well handled, they're going to be better. They're going to stick to a track better. The houndsmen have the ability to wean out which dogs are maybe should be sold for pets and which ones can be kept and used as hunting dogs. And you only get this if you get all of this time. You know, I'm the daughter of 2 dog trainers and ranch managers, and it's every single day. These houndsmen are out there doing this and working with these animals. So it is an ethics thing. This is making sure that as we're hunting, as we use dogs as pursuit, that we do it to the highest ability with the highest ethic that we have there. I think the other side of this is that there are studies on how this, you know, for lack of a better word to put it, catch and release is, and how this affects the animals. And, you know, they have to be run 6 or 7 times within the same day to see a cortisol increase on that. And I have some studies, if you guys would like to look at them. How this affects it long-term, I think, is a question we have to talk about, but that's something that will be in front of the commission with the scientists there to present that and look at that. So I do think that as we look at this, it's not going to be the same cat treed 50 times in a day. It's going to be spread out. These folks are doing 8, 9, 14 miles in a day to tree one cat, and sometimes they don't even get to that. These cats are sitting up in those trees. They're falling asleep during this time. It's not this horrible harassment that I think, and I come at this as someone who did not understand this to start with. I'm someone who has been flipped on this. I've seen it. I've witnessed these people working it and the people that are advocating for this, and I've been very impressed with them. I think where we look at how the commission can handle this is you have all the experts in the room there on wildlife management and on the science behind it. And so handing them the authority to do this, I have great faith that the commission will put the appropriate sideboards on this where it needs to be, keeping it in the seasons that it needs to be, and keeping an eye to making sure that our large carnivores are protected, as well as the ability for large carnivore hunting, as well as how we approach hunting in an ethical and fair chase way.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Members, any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Anybody else? Commissioner? No? Okay, let's go ahead on to the Zoom world then. Or I guess, Mr. McGagnon, were you looking to testify? Okay, let's see who's online. Let's go ahead and let him in. Mr. Worthington, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
We can. If you wouldn't mind, just introduce yourself and state who you're with.
Okay, perfect. My name is, first I'd like to Chairman Western and committee. My name is Luke Worthington. I'm the founder of the Wyoming Houndsman Association and their spokesman. I'm here to talk to you guys about this mountain lion pursuit bill. SF 178. This bill is for resident opportunity to allow houndsmen to harvest a lion and keep their dogs in the wood for training. As of right now, if we fill our hunting tag, we are getting penalized and we are out of the woods till the next calendar year, which this is about opportunity to keep our dogs in the woods. And with this pursuit season, we'll be able to harvest a lion and continue to train, because these dogs take a ton of training. We're with them 365 days a year. Getting a young pup, it takes tons of hours and many, many months to get them to the stage where they can get in with their pack and start hunting lions on their own. Most of my dogs, it's taken, usually a 2-year-old dog, it takes about 2 years for the dog to get to the point where they can consistently catch lions. And this is why this bill is so important to us. The benefits of catching and releasing cats is that they learn respect for people, pets, and I believe it reduces livestock confrontation, and which is of lately you guys have been seeing in the news in Colorado, in California. These lions are coming into town, they're killing pets. They're having a lot of human conflict because the pressure's not there. These are large carnivore animals they're the king of the woods. They're the alpha predator in the state of Wyoming, and being able to pursue these lions with our dogs, it teaches them tremendous respect. And most of the lions we catch, their stress level is extremely low. A lot of them are sleeping. They're very relaxed. And if us as houndsmen, you might catch that occasionally antsy cat, and we get out of there. You know, if we choose not to harvest that lion, we gather dogs up and we leave it. And I believe it's very low stress. But the biggest point of this bill is to help us really hone in our dogs, get them trained up, and keep them very straight on the desired game. You know, these dogs are a part of our family. They're just not tools for management, but they are members of our family, which, as of most of you guys, probably have a dog, and they're very special to you. And these dogs were bred to hunt, and allowing us to be able to pursue it just, you know, that fire's in them, and it makes them a lot better management tool for mountain lions. For over 20,000 years, man and dog have hunted together in unity for food, protection, and companionship. And I would just love the opportunity to be able to stay in the woods. But and with the exposure, this gives our dogs a lot more exposure, which I said earlier is it makes them really honed in. And your guys' comment about harassing the deer, this pursuit season is what we had planned, was just to go during the already allotted hunting season, which in most areas is September 1st through March 31st. And a lot of them areas stay open anyways. It's in the areas that are getting filled really fast, giving us an opportunity to be able to keep pursuing them in a non-lethal way. I would like to thank you guys, and I would hope for your support in this bill. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Worthington. Members, any questions? Thank you very much for your time. Oh, sorry, Representative Storr, my apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. I think Worthington, was that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, how many days are you currently spending chasing lions, and how many days do you anticipate you'd be able to do so with the passage of this bill and rules and regs?
Mr. Worthington?
Well, it will only be through the allotted. As of right now, our area that I hunt the most is not going to close, I don't believe. So I spend, mostly weekends with my kids, and I do some guiding, but I am very selective on the cats I run. It is against the law to run females with kittens and multiple lion tracks. So if you see if you see multiple lions, you cannot pursue them anyways. And all of us follow those laws, especially to protect them, the mamas and the babies. That's the last thing we'd want to do, is to hurt one of those or put stress on those mothers. But most of us are hunting just a couple days a week, mostly weekends. Does that answer your question?
Representative Storer, follow up?
And how do you see that follow up? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
ahead.
Sorry. I'm just trying to understand how this changes your ability to pursue this activity, I guess, and how much more often would you be out with the dogs?
Mr. Worthington?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. This is for the areas that are closing fast. Like there's some areas that are closing in December because of really high mountain lion populations. And this pursuit would allow us to hunt from when the mortality quota is filled until the season closure date. And I think it would give us our weekends until the end of the season. Does that help?
I think it does, Mr. Worthington. Thank you. Members, any additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Mr. Worthington, for your testimony. And with that,
Yes,
with that, public testimony is closed. Committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Burkhart. All right, I think any discussion? I know we've got the suggested amendment from the agency. Representative Byron.
Chairman, and this might be a question for the bringer of the bill or you as also on it. I'm going to stand in favor for this bill, but I am concerned about those that might not be successful in their lion hunt, going out a subsequent weekend and having excess competition from other houndsmen, if you will. So I don't know, maybe we could clean that up as we get in, or maybe we can trust that Game and Fish will be able to regulate that. But I'd say the only double-edged sword I see is, you harvest a lion early on, you continue to pursue them, and other sportsmen in that area then have continued pressure, that wouldn't normally be at ease. But just a thought as we move to vote on this bill.
Any further discussion? Senator Boner, would you like to address that?
Sure, appreciate the concern. That's why we have these committee hearings. And all I'll say is that there's been 2 other states, I think Montana and Idaho, that neighbor us that have these seasons. I haven't heard any of that sort of feedback. And obviously we have a Houndsman Association, which is in favor of the bill. So I'd like to think that concern would be mitigated.
Thank you, Senator. Committee, any further discussion? I know we've got the amendment here.
I would move this amendment.
Yes,
So
please.
Barb, on page 2, line 3, to delete 2 and make that may.
Is there a second? Seconded by Representative Angelos. Senator Boner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I would request to the committee is if you do approve the amendment, that maybe just have a required report back from Game and Fish to TRW by October 1st of this year, just to make sure that if we give them permissive ability, I want to make sure that they're going through the process. That's all.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Sensing the urge to vote, all those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. That amendment is adopted. Barb, you got that? As written, correct. Any further amendments? I know we've got a suggested one from the Senate Ag Chair. Is there another amendment? Seeing none, committee, any further discussion? Question. Chairwoman Newsom.
Thank you. So I'll maybe do it on the floor.
Certainly. Representative Burkhart? Oh, question being called. Barb, will you please call the roll?
Representative Angelos.
Aye.
Representative Burkhart.
Aye.
Representative Byron.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Singh.
Aye.
Representative Storer.
Aye.
Chairman Western. Representative Winter. Madam Chairwoman Newsom. 9 ayes.
Thank you, Barb. Senate File 178 has passed House TRW. And I think that clears the deck. Yeah, thank you very much for your attendance. We are adjourned.